I'm pleased to introduce our facilitators today, Melissa McLeod, Jennifer Thompson, and Brian Frank from Queen's University. To support a new bridging pathway Queen's developed for engineering college graduates, this team conducted a series of interviews with staff and faculty at post-secondary institutions across Canada to find out how to support students following a college to university pathway. Their recent report, Technology to Engineering Transfer Pathway, Institutional Stakeholders' Experiences and Perspectives, is now available to read on our website at oncat.ca. And I just wanted to say that this bridging pathway has tremendous potential to improve access and diversity in the engineering field, as engineering diploma graduates did not previously have such a clear and direct path towards pursuing higher education. So without further ado, I will hand it over to our facilitators today. Thanks.
All right, thanks very much, Meryl. So welcome everybody, and thanks very much for joining. My name is Brian Frank. I'm a professor at Queen's University. I teach in engineering. I'm also the chair in engineering education. And so the project that we're happy to talk about, as Meryl said, was focusing on how do we improve access into engineering programs. We're looking to diversify the program both in demographic senses, also in terms of the skill sets that students bring. Other provinces have had richer and highly effective transfer pathways to go from technology programs into engineering programs. And so the purpose of this was to help us understand what are the barriers and drivers that could help to enable the student transfer. And so in the study, we focused on how administrators and staff and faculty are perceiving engineering bridging transfer, trying to understand what they are saying. We used some framework from the literature, some of which had come out of some of our past work. And all of this is part of a larger attempt to both develop pathways, but also understand the pathways. So we've been partnering with ONCAT and with many universities and colleges in Ontario over about the past 8 years to both to build pathways and to understand. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to, there we go. I'm going to turn things over to Melissa and Jennifer, who were the primary researchers on this and identified the main recommendations for the study.
Okay, thanks, Brian. So I'll be taking you through the context of our study and our major findings. So after getting ethics approval, we conducted semi-structured interviews with 17 participants, 8 from colleges and 9 from universities. The participants were administrators, student advisors, or faculty members with transfer experience. Our open-ended interview questions ensured that we had consistency across interviews, but also let us be flexible in asking follow-up questions. The Zoom-generated transcripts were cleaned and then shared with individual participants for checking, and after that were uploaded to NVivo for coding. We used procedures from Richards and Hemphill and Saldana for open and inductive coding to generate an initial codebook, which we then mapped to the research questions. After that, we used independent and consensus coding to finalize the codebook. And then all the interview transcripts were coded using the final version of the codebook. Participants and the broader research team reviewed a draft of our findings and recommendations before the final report was written. So there were 6 themes that emerged through our data analysis. Under collaboration, participants reported challenges with the heavy workload of manually sharing information across departments. There was sometimes a lack of communication between institutions, sometimes not having the benefit of having known contacts at other institutions, and having departments and institutions dedicating varying levels of attention to pathways. For underrepresented groups, despite the recognition that transfer students needed tailored support, there was still a reliance on existing generic institutional supports. There may also be small numbers of underrepresented groups, which means that institutions may not be able to plan strategically for them. And participants also pointed out that transfer students needed representation in their mentors, faculty, and decision-making processes for pathways. For student-facing barriers, the belief persisted that college students were weaker students and that transfer students needed the same supports as direct entry students. Transfer students had limited dedicated financial supports and often struggled to get transfer-specific information, advising, and documentation. Under misalignment, participants reported that institutions often had quite different values as the foundation of transfer pathway development. Also, government, provincial, and professional organizations also have different requirements or frameworks for pathways. For credit recognition processes, the participants reported that it could be very difficult for students to navigate and understand the processes, and that it may require a lot of student work and resources to navigate them. The transfer processes can also be inflexible to individual student needs. And finally, for measuring program success, participants wanted to gather, analyze, and share data, as well as have data sharing included in articulation agreements. However, they reported that there was typically a lack of data-informed decision-making because there was little tracking of transfer students at both the sending and receiving institutions. And so now I'll hand it over to Jen to take you through our recommendations.
Love that. I'm muted. Sorry about that. Some of you may have already seen this graph if you have had a chance to access our report, but otherwise it's here, and we will obviously share the link to our report for you to take a look at. But essentially, one of the things we did to sort of prepare for recommendations was to provide sort of a mapping and outlook as to who is directly impacted by these barriers, successes, problems, etc. And so what we found is we tracked the direct student impacts, organizational impacts, as well as systemic impacts, including in between organizations, as well as the accrediting or credentialing institutions. And so we found that this has sort of helped us broadly map those impacts and recognize that across every single span of our research, the idea of supporting students, the idea of providing them with that tailored support that Melissa mentioned, and providing this data tracking architecture to really support the institutional connection was something that came up as incredibly important and that impacting all facets of our research. And so that kind of led us to these 5 areas that we want to focus on today, and we're going to sort of invite you to discuss 3 of them. And now Melissa touched on many of these already, but a few that we're going to be talking about today is just for looking for opportunities to facilitate data tracking and sharing so that people can better understand student success, student matriculation rates, and use that to inform decision-making at their institutions, as well as program institutional orientation that goes along with tailored support, just in the sense of how are we providing context-specific introduction to information and support for students, as well as the last one we focus on is collaboration and ongoing learning. Many of the participants reported that they didn't really have a sense of shared responsibility or shared understanding, or they didn't have a chance to interact with transfer individuals from other institutions. And so being able to collaborate and talk and discuss with other administrators and transfer professionals was something that they were really looking forward to. So looking for these sectoral insights and new developments, finding opportunities to share is something that we would love your input on, and that we also have a few suggestions to recommend. So,
Oh, sorry. So I just some instructions before we pop into the breakout rooms. Please join the WooClap if you haven't already. The QR code is there on the slides, and I believe Jen has popped the link into the chat. So we're going through 3 different topics. And for topics 1 and 2, we've divided them into subtopics and assigned one to each breakout room just as a starting point. So please start there. You can write in your thoughts and suggestions in the WooClap, and then if time allows, you can move on to the other subtopics with your room. There will be a facilitator in each breakout room if needed to help with the discussion, and you can always come back to this screen on your computers or your phones once the breakout rooms are open if you need to review the questions or need help with WooClap. So I think we're ready to go into the breakout rooms for our first topic on data tracking and sharing. So in your ideal world, what mechanisms can be used to support the following: data tracking, sharing, and progress monitoring?
Just a quick note, if any of you see an error occurred message, which occasionally occurs with WooClap, all you need to do is refresh your screens, and that should go away. I'm not sure why that's happening, but it might occur for some of you. That's not a problem. You just need to refresh your page, and that should solve the problem. So soon you should receive an invitation to a breakout room that Allison is setting up for us. And then once you go into your rooms, feel free to discuss that question and your subtopics and how you think we can facilitate data tracking. Sorry for anyone who got cut off. We do want to make sure we're keeping tight to our timeline, so apologies for that. We're trying to keep it to about 8 minutes per room. This first room was about 10 minutes so everyone can get used to the format. But if you do ever need an extra minute or so to speak, um, you're always welcome to message us in the chat, and we'll try to be flexible with that.
Good. So I think now that we're all, excuse me, back in the main room, just before we move on to topic 2, we'll do a brief wrap up from our data sharing discussion. So I can report a bit from my group. We were talking about topic B, data sharing, although there was overlap with the other two. And anybody from our room, please feel free to jump in if there was something else you wanted to share. But I think generally the message was that, or the discussion was that, again, there's a desire for the data. There's a sense that the data is being collected and stored somewhere, but no clarity around who has that data and how to access it. But data is often required for different reporting systems that institutions are required to use, but there isn't necessarily a mandate to collect and share the data. So that was sort of where our discussion went. So I don't know if facilitators or if someone from the other rooms would like to jump in and share.
I can just briefly summarize a few points from group 1. We said that not having buy-in from academic areas makes it really hard to find data. So it's often a struggle to even access data. You have to kind of go looking for it at times. So it would help to have buy-in from a higher level to support proper data collection. And also, we don't have any consistent data collection happening at like a regional or national level at the moment on transfer students. So that's another thing that we would love to see happen.
Okay, thank you. And anybody from one of the other rooms before we move on?
Well, I'll share that in group 3, we had a pretty broad-ranging conversation and generally agreed that progress monitoring would be good and would be challenging. We hadn't got to solutions yet as part of our conversation, but that will be try to be a little more efficient with our discussions next time.
It did go very quickly.
Yeah, and that is an important note, that if a sudden spark of inspiration comes to any of you after this session, these slides are accessible asynchronously. So if you do want to add something to the collaboration board after the session ends, that is absolutely fine. Feel free to add it at any point. All the posts are anonymous, but it's just, yeah, if a spark of inspiration comes to you, we'd love to have that feedback so we can add it to suggestions or recommendations for the future.
So I think at this point I'll hand it over to, I think Jen is leading us into topic 2.
Perfect. So topic 2, hopefully, I think many institutions are already doing this, but a thing that came up in our research a lot was the idea of orientation, and the idea that institutions need some kind of systematic orientation to support the students, not just for engineering, for example, but also for the institution itself, whether you're a college or a university or a community, right? What groups and services and products are available in the community, whether it's an affinity group like an Indigenous community or an Asian Canadian community, or just the community itself. Kingston, for example, we're from Queens. So what we'd love for you to do is discuss what transfer orientation looks like at your institution currently. Do you have anything specific for transfer students? Is it just generic? And what could it look like? Are there any ideas that have been percolating in your minds as to how you could better support transfer students? Or, we love universal design, all students that you can add at a program, institutional, community level to support those groups. So Allison, whenever you're ready, you should get an invitation to the same breakout room, I believe, and then you can continue your discussions there. We'd love to hear from you. Perfect. Well, welcome back, everyone. Okay, perfect. So I popped around a little bit, but just a couple of great things I heard was sort of the desire for transfer students to become a part of the community. So some people said that their regular orientation was enough, but they wanted more community development for their transfer students. A few people said that they sort of treat them as upper year students. We got some great advice about providing sort of a focused orientation at a different time period. So whether that was in the spring or if there's a bridging program in the summer like Queens offers, offering them some opportunities there before other students arrive so they can kind of build that cohesive community amongst people without the sort of cacophony of other students, especially first year students that are very excited to be there. But was there anything else we'd like to share? Are there any facilitators from either the program, institution, or community level would like to share some of their insights, responses, or even challenges, questions they have that you don't have solutions for yet?
I can just share one thing that came up in our group when they were talking about, something that they were looking for a solution for, was advocating for having a dedicated transfer student orientation, and why that might be different from orientation from direct entry students or for mature students. And there was just discussion of, different ways you might approach that advocacy. And one that we were just talking about before we got pulled back was an argument, I guess, using return on investment. Like, I guess there's American research that shows if you spend this much on orientation and support in the first semester, students stay and persist, and then that brings in more student spending at the institution over time. So that was just something that came up in our group.
Yeah, that would be a wonderful future study. Hint, wink, wink, of potentially maybe doing some data tracking of results and conclusions that can be drawn from orientations provided versus matriculation and student success later on. Once we get all this data tracking solved. Perfect. Is there anyone else who would like to share from their group?
I'll share something from group 3, and this is one of the, I think, helpful comments that Aaron made, that sometimes when students come in as transfer students, they're often a little more mature. They've usually had a year or two at some other institution, and so they may not have some of the, I think as she said, body paint and cheering emphasis on orientation as some of the direct from high school do. And so even though some of the goals may be the same and some things could be integrated, recognizing that some of the interests in how you provide an orientation could be different because of the different maturity and age levels of the students.
Absolutely. And like you said, Brian, that might be a good opportunity to combine a mature student and a transfer student orientation because they may have a lot of the same needs or wants, or providing students with the option.
I'm just to follow up on that point, though, in our group, we talked about how that can be a problem because how an institution defines mature students might not match with transfer students. And I think somebody had a specific example of mature students are typically 25 and over at their institution, but that their transfer student body were kind of the 19 to 24 age. So they didn't quite fit into that category either.
And that brings us to one of our conclusions. I'll give you a little preview. That context matters, and that making sure, obviously, that the changes and decision your institution makes are obviously highly dependent on the context of your individual organizations and institutions. Perfect. So we're going to move on sort of our final topic. Now, this one's open, so anyone can answer. There's no subtopics in this one. We just want to know kind of what collaborative opportunities or professional learning events you'd like to see in the future. What would you be interested? What do you think would be helpful? Because we can propose things till the end of time, but what would be most helpful for people working in administration, faculty, transfer advisors, student support staff? What would be helpful for you to either collaborate with each other between institutions or to get support from an organization like ONCAT to learn best practices, things like that? What would be some of those collaborative or ongoing learning events that you would find particularly helpful? So for the final time, we'll let you off into your breakout rooms. Feel free to have your discussion. We'll last about 8 minutes just because we do want to have time for some concluding thoughts. And Allison will put you in your rooms. Have a good final discussion.
We're all back in the room now. And so to start wrapping up, so just a reminder that we will be sending out a handout with ideas taken from the WooClap, but that won't be happening immediately. So there is still time. The WooClap will be open. If you have like a burning idea that you want to add it in. It's anonymous, and we will see it before the final resource handout gets sent out. So just wrapping up a bit from our report and then from today's discussion. Moving into, or did anybody want to share specific ideas from this topic? There were lots of them.
I love seeing all the lunch and learns. We love lunch and learns. Yeah.
I'll share one that came up at the end of our conversation, and that was having an opportunity for particular topic conversations that might be relevant to particular roles. So, for example, best practices in making an articulation agreement, or transfer advising, or identifying credit transfer or student support, that perhaps because people may have fairly particular roles, that there may be interest in something like a lunch and learn or equivalent on a particular topic, so that people with that particular role might share their ideas. So I thought that was a really good idea.
Okay, so just being aware of the times, just so we don't run out of time. If we could go to the last slide there, Jen. Yeah, so wrapping up from our study. So the participants in our study were all, committed to pathway students, and they were optimistic about the future of transfer pathways in Ontario, and they were excited to talk about their work. The themes that came up across our findings, that came across, all the themes, were that transfer pathway development, implementation, and success is an iterative process. And it depends on communication within and across institutions and various stakeholders. And to highlight the importance of formalizing transfer processes and policies, which could then free up resources for supporting students, one of our participants said articulation agreements are golden. So tying this in a bit with our, brief but I think very engaged conversations this afternoon. I was only in one breakout room, but I could see from all the comments on the WooClap that I really feel like everybody was, again, very excited about their work and committed to transfer pathways and transfer students. But something that did come up that I thought was interesting, going back to articulation agreements, was that the comment that, you can have a statement, whether it's on data sharing or student orientation, that can be included in an articulation agreement, but it's just a statement. So then it's figuring out, what are the action points to put that into practice and how does that work? So I don't know if Jen or Brian have any other, not to put you on the spot, but any other final comments to wrap us up before we end for the day.
Just as to be cognizant of time, because I know Meryl has a couple of announcements, we just want to give a special thanks to all the people who contributed, as well as to let you know that we'll be sending the handout in the week that Melissa already mentioned. And sorry, I'll turn it over to you, Brian.
This was just a question from people about how they'd be able to add comments to the different elements of the WooClap. So maybe it's not totally obvious, but perhaps we could follow up with how you could go back and see or add comments to the various stages of the WooClap.
Absolutely, yeah. Anyone who would like to know that, if you want to stay for an extra minute, I can run you through a super quick tutorial on how to do that at the end of the session. And we'll turn it over to Meryl.
Okay, thank you guys so much. This has been such a great, informative, and interactive session today. Just a little note there, I put the Queen's report that our authors here worked on. It's on our website, so I put the link in the chat in case you want to learn more about their research. And yeah, thanks for joining us today and this year's batch of Lunch and Learns. We hope you appreciated the opportunity to connect with your colleagues and to learn more about transfer and mobility projects across the sector. We don't have any Lunch and Learns planned moving forward. So as we head toward the holiday break, we'll be reviewing this year's activities and thinking about plans for future ways to gather, both online and in person. And one of the outcomes hopefully will be based on the information that we gathered today about what kinds of learning opportunities you're looking for. So thank you for coming, and yeah, feel free to hang around if you have questions or want to get in touch, but we'll see you soon. Thanks, everyone.